Willow Creek had always been the kind of town that seemed frozen in time. It sat tucked between rolling hills and endless fields of golden wheat, the kind that swayed lazily in the afternoon breeze. The main street was lined with red brick shops that had been there for decades, their signs faded but still proud. The local cafe knew everyone's coffee order, and the postman waved at every doorstep he passed. Even the river, winding gently along the edge of town, seemed to move at a slower pace, its surface glimmering under the sun. Life here was simple, predictable, and, for most residents, deeply comforting. That sense of comfort broke on a cold October morning. Mist clung low to the grass as the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops. A man out for his usual jog followed the winding trail that ran alongside the riverbank. He was halfway through his route when he noticed something strange in the distance, a pale shape lying among the tall grass, just beyond a cluster of reeds. At first, he thought it was a bundle of clothes, maybe something left behind by campers or fishermen. But as he moved closer, a heavy unease settled in his chest. It wasn't a pile of clothes at all. It was a young woman. Her skin was unnaturally still, her eyes closed, her lips tinged with a faint blue. She wore a pale yellow dress that looked delicate, almost out of place against the damp earth beneath her. Her shoes were missing, and her hair was tangled, as if it had been caught by the wind or dragged through water. The air was silent except for the faint murmur of the river, but in that silence was a weight, a sense that something terrible had happened here. The jogger's heart pounded as he stumbled back and fumbled for his phone. Minutes later, the sound of sirens broke the quiet, their echo carrying far across the sleepy streets. Police cars arrived, followed by an ambulance that parked a few meters away but never opened its rear doors in urgency. Officers moved quickly, stringing bright yellow tape around the area, their boots leaving deep marks in the damp ground. By the time the sun had fully risen, word had already spread. Willow Creek wasn't used to tragedy on this scale. Curious onlookers gathered at a distance, whispering among themselves, their faces pale. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter, and older residents shook their heads in disbelief. Nobody could remember the last time the police had responded to something more serious than a bar fight or a stolen bicycle. For the first time in years, the town's familiar warmth felt fragile. The peaceful hum of daily life had been replaced by a quiet, uneasy tension. Nobody knew who the girl was, or how she had ended up on their riverbank. But everyone understood one thing: Willow Creek was no longer the same. Something dark had found its way in, and it would not be leaving quietly. It took several days before the young woman's identity was confirmed. The town had been buzzing with questions, rumors shifting and changing with each conversation. Some said she was a traveler passing through, others believed she might have been from a nearby community. When the official report came in, the truth was both unexpected and unsettling. Her name was Emily Carter, a 23-year-old nursing student from the city, more than 2 hours away. She had no family in Willow Creek, no recorded visits, and no apparent reason to be there. That single fact deepened the mystery and cast a long shadow over the investigation. Detectives began piecing together her last known movements. They traced her to the city bus terminal, where she had been spotted on security cameras 3 nights before her body was found. The footage was grainy and tinted with the flickering glow of streetlights, but it clearly showed Emily arriving alone, carrying a small black backpack. Her steps were purposeful, yet there was an air of nervousness in the way she glanced over her shoulder more than once. Moments later, another figure appeared in the frame, a tall man in a dark jacket. He stood close enough to speak with her, though the camera's angle made it impossible to see his face clearly. There was no audio, just the silent exchange between the two before Emily boarded a bus heading toward Willow Creek. No one from the bus recalled her clearly. Passengers said she kept to herself, staring out of the window for most of the trip. The driver remembered her faintly, mentioning she paid in cash and didn't ask about stops. By the time she arrived, the streets were empty, lit only by the dim orange glow of old street lamps. From there, her trail grew cold. The autopsy report revealed that Emily had died from blunt force trauma to the head. There were also signs of drowning. Traces of river water were found in her lungs. The pathologist could not say for certain whether she had been struck before entering the water or if the injuries occurred afterward. That uncertainty added a troubling layer to the case. Police theorized she might have been attacked near the river, or perhaps brought there after her death to mislead investigators. As the news spread, the mood in Willow Creek changed. People who had once left their doors unlocked began checking their locks twice at night. Neighbors who used to stop and chat in the street now hurried past each other. The thought that a stranger, perhaps a dangerous one, had been among them without anyone noticing was enough to unsettle even the most level-headed residents. In the days that followed, Emily's photograph was everywhere, pinned to bulletin boards, taped to shop windows, printed in the local paper. Her eyes, frozen in a soft and distant gaze, seemed to follow people as they went about their day. She had come to their town without warning, and now she was gone, leaving behind only questions that seemed to multiply the longer they went unanswered. The deeper investigators looked into Emily's life, the stranger the case became. While searching her apartment, they discovered she had been working on a final-year project for her nursing degree, but it was unlike anything her professors had expected. Alongside textbooks and medical notes were boxes of clippings from old newspapers, maps with red pins, and files on missing persons cases from across the state. The centerpiece of her research appeared to be one case in particular, the unsolved murder of a woman named Laura Mason, whose death had taken place 15 years earlier. Laura had been found in almost the exact same location as Emily, near the riverbank on the edge of Willow Creek. She too had been barefoot, her shoes never recovered, and positioned in a similar way in the grass. Back then, police had treated the case with urgency, but after months of dead ends and no suspects, it faded into the cold case archives. Most people in town had stopped talking about it years ago. The similarities between the two deaths were too precise to ignore. Detectives began to consider the possibility that Emily's murder was connected to Laura's. Among Emily's handwritten notes was a timeline of Laura's final hours, pieced together from interviews, police records, and small-town gossip she had apparently tracked down herself. It became clear Emily had been trying to retrace Laura's last movements, perhaps hoping to find something that had been missed before. Several pages were filled with detailed sketches of the riverbank area, noting possible entry points, blind spots, and areas hidden from the view of nearby trails. One detail stood out in the notebook. The very last page contained just a single word, written in shaky, uneven letters: Hunter. There was no explanation, no context, just the name. Whether it was a surname, a nickname, or a clue, no one could be sure. But the word had been underlined twice, as if Emily had wanted to make sure it could not be overlooked. Rumors began to spread quickly. Some believed Emily had discovered who had killed Laura Mason and that her own murder was meant to silence her. Others speculated that the killer had been dormant for years, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The sense of safety in Willow Creek, already fragile, began to crumble even further. The investigation shifted to focus on people connected to both women. Detectives interviewed old witnesses from Laura's case, some of whom admitted they had never told the full truth back then. Others seemed fearful, as if speaking about the case might bring danger to their doorstep. The possibility that the same person had been living quietly among them for over a decade was almost too terrifying to think about. Emily's curiosity had clearly drawn her into dangerous territory. Whether she had known the risks or underestimated them, it was certain that she had been following a trail, one that led straight into the shadows of a mystery that had haunted Willow Creek for years. The single word in Emily's notebook, Hunter, became the focal point of the investigation. Detectives began searching for anyone in the region with that name, combing through old town records, property deeds, and archived police reports. It didn't take long before they came across a man who fit the profile in more ways than one. His name was Samuel Hunter, a 58-year-old former trapper and hunting guide who had lived on the outskirts of Willow Creek for most of his life. He was known for keeping to himself, rarely coming into town except to buy supplies. His cabin sat deep in the woods, hidden behind a narrow dirt road that most locals avoided after dark. Samuel's name had surfaced briefly during the original investigation into Laura Mason's murder, but back then, police hadn't found enough evidence to tie him to the crime. He had been questioned, denied knowing Laura, and was eventually dismissed as a suspect. Now, with the similarities between the two cases and Emily's handwritten clue, the spotlight was back on him. Detectives decided to pay him a visit. When they arrived at his property, the first thing they noticed was the isolation. The cabin was weathered and leaning slightly to one side, its roof patched with mismatched shingles. Rusted animal traps hung on the porch, and the yard was littered with piles of scrap metal, old tools, and broken furniture. A pair of hunting rifles rested against the wall just inside the door. Samuel answered with a wary expression, his eyes sharp and unblinking. He insisted he had never met Emily and claimed he hadn't left his property in days. His alibi for the night she was last seen was thin. He said he'd been home alone, listening to the radio and working on repairing an old generator. There were no witnesses to confirm it. The detectives took note of his responses, but knew suspicion alone wasn't enough for an arrest. Neighbors, though few and far between, told police unsettling stories. Some had seen strange lights moving in the woods near Samuel's cabin late at night. Others spoke of hearing distant screams on stormy evenings, though they had always dismissed them as the sound of animals. One neighbor mentioned that Samuel often roamed the trails by the river with a flashlight, even in bad weather. Despite the growing unease, the investigation stalled again. There was still no physical evidence linking him to Emily or Laura. Then came the breakthrough. A fisherman walking along a remote section of the river discovered a pair of women's shoes tangled in weeds along the shore. They were damp but intact, and a quick comparison to photographs confirmed they belonged to Emily Carter. The location where they were found was telling. It was far from the spot where her body was discovered, but directly connected by a narrow, unmarked trail leading straight to Samuel Hunter's land. This single discovery breathed new life into the case. For the first time, investigators felt they were closing in on the person responsible for both murders. The shadows around Samuel Hunter were growing darker, and the truth was beginning to surface. With the discovery of Emily's shoes so close to Samuel Hunter's land, the investigation moved quickly. Detectives obtained a warrant to search his property, determined to find the evidence that had eluded them for years. The search began early in the morning, when the fog still clung to the treetops and the cabin was shrouded in damp silence. Officers spread out across the property, combing through every shed, storage box, and patch of overgrown grass. 4 hours, it seemed as though they might leave empty-handed once again, until one officer pried open the lock on an old, weather-beaten shed at the back of the yard. Inside, the smell was stale, heavy with dust and rust. Against one wall sat a wooden chest, its hinges stiff from years of neglect. When it was opened, the contents told a story that no one wanted to hear. Inside were small personal items: bracelets, watches, a torn scarf, and a single silver earring. They were mismatched, from different styles and eras, but all carried the unmistakable weight of belonging to someone who would never wear them again. Near the bottom of the box was a locket, tarnished but still engraved with the initials L.M., Laura Mason's. Beneath that, wrapped in a thin plastic bag, was Emily Carter's student ID card. It was still slightly damp, as if it had recently been in the water. The evidence was undeniable. DNA testing later confirmed traces from both Laura Mason and Emily Carter on items inside the chest. Investigators concluded that Samuel Hunter had been the predator lurking in the shadows for years, using the riverbank as his hunting ground. Laura had been his first known victim, silenced before she could ever tell her story. Emily, unknowingly, had stumbled too close to the truth while researching Laura's case, and Samuel had struck again to protect his secret. When officers confronted Samuel with the findings, he remained eerily calm. There was no outburst, no protest, only a flat stare, as if the weight of what he had done was something he had carried so long it no longer felt heavy. He was taken into custody without resistance, though the quietness of his surrender only made the case feel more chilling. News of the arrest spread through Willow Creek in hours, but there was no celebration. The capture of Samuel Hunter brought relief, yes, but also a deep sorrow. 2 young lives had been stolen, and no amount of justice could restore them. For many, it was difficult to accept that the man responsible had been living just beyond the edge of town, hidden by the trees, watching and waiting. Emily's notebook was later published in full, her research praised for solving the case that had haunted Willow Creek for over a decade. The riverbank where both women were found became a quiet memorial. Fresh flowers appeared there almost daily, sometimes from people who knew them, often from strangers moved by their stories. The water still flowed as it always had, but for the town, it would never be just a river again. It was a place where innocence had been taken and truth had finally been found, though at a heartbreaking cost.